Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
The 1896 paper by Antoine Henri Becquerel, titled Streamless Radiations emises par phosphorescence the luranium, stands as a seminal document in the history of science, a testament to the intricate interplay of hypothesis, methodical procedure, and profound serendipity. Its publication in the Comtesse Renders de l'Académie des Sciences initiated a conceptual cascade that would ultimately reconfigure the foundations of physics. This essay undertakes a rigorous evaluation of the work's internal claims, progressing section by section through the logic of Becquerel's investigation. We will analyze the specific arguments, the presented evidence, and the intellectual framework that both guided and was ultimately dismantled by its own findings. The objective is to illuminate the paper as a dynamic record of scientific inquiry, where an elegant but incomplete premise, pursued with empirical integrity, yielded a discovery far exceeding its initial scope. It is in the careful, almost understated, reporting of anomalous results that the paper's revolutionary power resides, offering a powerful narrative of a mind confronting a phenomenon that defied the established physics of its era. Section 1. The guiding hypothesis and experimental architecture. The intellectual impetus for Becquerel's investigation is stated with an admirable directness in his opening paragraphs. The work commences from a specific, logical, and deeply compelling analogy rooted in the recent and electrifying discovery of X-rays by Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen. Becquerel's foundational claim is that the phenomenon of phosphorescence might itself be the source of a similar form of penetrating radiation. He posits a causal relationship: the luminescence observed in certain materials, when exposed to light, could be intrinsically linked to the emission of invisible rays capable of traversing opaque materials. This hypothesis possessed a beautiful symmetry, since the Crookes tubes used by Röntgen produced fluorescence on the glass wall concurrent with X-ray emission. It was a reasonable leap to question whether all luminous phenomena of that class shared this property. The framework is one of classical cause and effect, seeking to extend a known marvel into a general principle. For his primary subject, Becquerel selected a substance with which his family had extensive experimental history, the double sulfate of uranium and potassium. His choice was deliberate, predicated on the salt's particularly vivid and persistent phosphorescence. The experimental architecture he designed was elegant in its simplicity. It involved wrapping a photographic plate, specifically a Lumiere plate with a silver bromide emulsion, in 2 layers of very thick black paper. This preparation ensured the plate was impervious to the effects of conventional visible light. Upon this light-proof barrier he would place a crust of the uranium salt and expose the entire apparatus to direct sunlight for several hours. The central argument being tested was that the solar energy absorbed by the salt and re-emitted as phosphorescence would be accompanied by a penetrating radiation that would fog the shielded photographic plate beneath. The logic is impeccably linear, and the methodology is crafted with precision to isolate the variable of interest, which at this stage was phosphorescence itself. Section 2. Initial results and the apparent confirmation. A second movement of Becquerel's paper details the execution of the initial experiment and presents results that appear to offer a triumphant confirmation of his starting hypothesis. After exposing the prepared apparatus to sunlight as described, he proceeded to develop the photographic plate. The outcome was precisely as his framework predicted. He reports that the silhouette of the phosphorescent substance appeared in black upon the negative. The image, he notes, was sharp and corresponded to the shape of the uranium salt crust placed upon the paper. To further substantiate the claim that this effect stemmed from a penetrating radiation, Becquerel describes interposing objects between the salt and the wrapped plate. When a coin was placed beneath the salt, its shape was clearly rendered on the developed plate. When a pane of glass was interposed, it seemed to slightly weaken the effect, suggesting some absorption of the emissions. These observations powerfully reinforced his conclusion The phosphorescent uranium salt was indeed emitting rays that traverse opaque paper but are attenuated by denser materials like metal and glass. At this juncture of the report, the claim appears secure. The energy of the sun, absorbed by the salt, powers the emission of these invisible, penetrating radiations. The entire phenomenon fits comfortably within a known energetic economy. The sun provides the input, phosphorescence is the visible process, and the penetrating rays are the invisible product. The logic is closed, the evidence appears corroborative, and the initial question seems to have found its answer. The paper, had it concluded here, would have been a clever and interesting addendum to the study of X-rays, a minor extension of a major discovery. It would, however, have been fundamentally incorrect in its central attribution of Section 3, the anomalous finding and the intellectual pivot, the true genius of the paper, and indeed of Becquerel, as an experimentalist, is revealed in its third section. Here, the narrative takes a turn dictated by chance and seized upon by a prepared mind. Becquerel recounts preparing his experiment on the final days of February St. 1896, but the Parisian skies were overcast, preventing the requisite exposure to sunlight. Following his protocol, he placed the entire prepared apparatus, with the uranium salt resting upon the wrapped photographic plate, inside a dark drawer. He fully expected that no reaction would occur, as his guiding hypothesis demanded solar activation. The core claim of his investigation was that sunlight was the engine of the phenomenon. After several days, on March 1st, he chose to develop the plate anyway. He offers little explanation for this action, which might have been driven by simple thoroughness or a prescient flicker of curiosity. The result of this development was, by his own account, a source of profound surprise. The silhouette of the salt crystals appeared on the plate with, as he describes it, great intensity. This single observation was a momentous anomaly. It was an effect without its presumed cause. The energy from the sun was absent, yet the emission of penetrating rays had occurred, perhaps even more powerfully than in the previous sun-drenched experiments. This forced an immediate and complete inversion of his initial hypothesis. The central claim of the paper shifts dramatically at this point. Becquerel concludes that the emission is an intrinsic property of the uranium salt itself, a persistent phenomenon that happens in total darkness and is independent of the stimulus of phosphorescence. The energy source was a complete mystery. The phenomenon was disconnected from the familiar world of light-induced transformations. The intellectual pivot is swift and decisive. He recognizes that the phosphorescence he so carefully chose his material for is likely a concurrent, perhaps even coincidental, property. The true source of the rays resided within the substance of the uranium itself. This section of the paper captures the essence of scientific discovery, the honest confrontation with data that invalidates a cherished hypothesis and the courage to follow the evidence toward a far stranger and more profound conclusion. Section 4, preliminary characterization of the uranic rays. Having established the spontaneous and persistent nature of the emissions, Becquerel's paper proceeds to a preliminary characterization of these newly observed uranic rays. This section documents his attempt to understand their physical properties, largely by analogy with known radiations like light and X-rays. He repeats the experiment using a thin sheet of aluminum between the salt and the plate, confirming that the rays readily penetrate the metal. He then describes investigations into their behavior with respect to the laws of optics, specifically reflection and refraction. Here, the paper demonstrates the limitations imposed by the conceptual and instrumental tools of the period. To test for a reflection, he employed a curved metallic mirror, attempting to focus the uranic rays in the same manner as light. To test for refraction, he used a quartz prism. His reported results in this domain are tentative and, with the benefit of a century of hindsight, reveal a degree of interpretive ambiguity. While he suggests the rays do undergo reflection and refraction, the evidence he presents is faint and inconclusive. He was observing complex scattering effects and secondary emissions that were difficult to pass with the available apparatus, the claim that these rays behave according to the classical laws of optics is the weakest in the paper. This is a fascinating glimpse into the process of scientific modelling. Becquerel was attempting to fit a fundamentally new phenomenon, the particulate and high-energy emissions of radioactive decay, into the familiar wave-based framework of light. His inability to generate clear, repeatable evidence for reflection and refraction was, in itself, a significant finding. It was a clue that these emissions possessed a character distinct from both visible light and, in some ways, even from Röntgen's X-rays. The paper thus leaves the physical identity of the rays as an open and perplexing question, correctly identifying their penetrating power while, reaching for analogies that would soon prove inertia. Section 5, the unstated metaphysical challenge, the final, and perhaps most profound contribution of Becquerel's 1896 paper lies in the claim it makes, through its very silence, while meticulously detailing his procedures and observations. Becquerel offers absolutely no speculation on the origin of the energy that produces the uranic rays. This careful, empirical restraint is precisely what makes the paper so powerful. It presents the scientific community with a raw, unadorned paradox. Matter, in the form of a uranium salt, was continuously and spontaneously emitting energy without any discernible external input and without undergoing any visible change. This stood in stark and unsettling opposition to the most sacred conservation laws of 19th century physics, particularly the first law of thermodynamics. The universe, as understood, was a closed system of accounts where energy could be transformed but never created from nothing. Becquerel's draw experiment presented an object that seems to be an inexhaustible fountain of energy. By refraining from proposing a speculative source, such as the absorption of some unknown ambient radiation, he laid the bare fact of the phenomenon before the world. The implicit claim of this final section is the most revolutionary of all. Here is a fundamental property of matter that our current physics cannot explain. The paper functions as an unanswered question posed to the entirety of the scientific establishment. It is a quiet announcement that the seemingly solid edifice of classical physics had a deep crack in its foundation. The work concludes with the simple, declarative truth of the photographic plate, a piece of evidence that demanded a new understanding of the atom, of energy, and of the very stability of matter itself. It was this unanswered question that would directly inspire the heroic labours of Marie and Pierre Curie and set Ernest Rutherford on the path toward discovering the atomic nucleus, thereby birthing the nuclear age from a shadowed plate in a darkened Parisian drawer. Section 6, legacy of an empirical masterpiece. In conclusion, the enduring significance of Becquerel-Serlès radiations emises par phosphorescence de luranium derives from its dual nature as both a product of flawed assumption and a paragon empirical honesty. A section by such an evaluation reveals a narrative of scientific progress in miniature. The initial claim, linking penetrating radiation to phosphorescence, was an elegant and logical starting point that provided the necessary experimental momentum. The second claim, of its apparent confirmation via sunlight exposure, illustrates the potent influence of expectation on interpretation. It is the third section, detailing the definitive and anomalous result from the drawer experiment, that elevates the paper from a clever investigation to a foundational text. Here, the claim shifts to one of spontaneous, intrinsic emission, a conclusion that was both empirically sound and conceptually shattering. His subsequent attempts to characterize the rays reveal a scientist working at the absolute limit of his era's conceptual framework, grappling with a phenomenon that resisted easy categorization. The final, unspoken claim of the paper, embodied in its refusal to speculate on the energy's source, its most powerful legacy. It presented a direct challenge to the conservation principles that underpinned all of physics. Becquerel's meticulous and dispassionate reporting of a persistent anomaly provided the irrefutable evidence that a new physical reality existed. The work serves as a timeless illustration that a discovery's magnitude is often found in the investigator's willingness to abandon a beautiful hypothesis in the face of contradictory, even incomprehensible, evidence. It is a document that did not provide all the answers but instead formulated the essential, world-altering question.
We really appreciate you tuning in to this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.